November 1944. The frost clings to shattered stone in eastern France. Where rail tracks once gleamed under peacetime sun now twist, like broken vertebrae, through villages reduced to ash and memory. German Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin stands at a makeshift observation post near Metz, field glasses pressed against weathered eyes, watching something that defies every calculation of warfare he has learned in 2 decades of military service. American locomotives, dozens of them, roll westward across terrain his own forces destroyed mere months ago, pulling endless chains of freight cars laden with steel, ammunition, and the machinery of total war. The rails beneath them are new, impossibly new. He lowers the glasses, and in that gesture lies the collapse of an empire's certainty. The German General Staff had studied logistics, as philosophers study truth, with reverence and mathematical precision. Von Mellenthin himself had helped orchestrate the blitzkrieg advances through Poland and France, where speed meant survival and supply lines stretched like fragile silk threads across conquered territories. The Wehrmacht doctrine was elegant in its brutality. Strike fast, seize enemy resources, live off captured depots. When rails were destroyed, they stayed destroyed for months, sometimes years. Soviet trains had barely functioned even before Barbarossa tore through their infrastructure. British supply chains buckled under sustained U-boat pressure. This was the accepted physics of industrial warfare: destruction compounds, reconstruction crawls, and eventually the aggressor's momentum bleeds into logistical collapse. America was supposed to be different only in scale, not in kind. An ocean away, soft with prosperity, unfamiliar with existential combat. Its soldiers would be well-fed perhaps, but green, untempered. Its factories prolific, but vulnerable to the same material constraints that governed all nations. Even the vast quantities of Liberty ships and Sherman tanks had been factored into German strategic projections. Impressive numbers, yes, but numbers that could be calculated, anticipated, degraded through attrition. What von Mellenthin watches through his field glasses cannot be calculated because it rewrites the fundamental equations. The United States Army Corps of Engineers had landed in Normandy with the infantry, but they came armed with something beyond rifles, an industrial philosophy so foreign to European warfare it might as well have arrived from another planet. When German forces retreated through France in the summer of 1944, they executed scorched earth with characteristic efficiency. Every rail junction from Normandy to the Rhine was systematically demolished. Bridges collapsed into rivers. Switching stations vanished in precisely planted explosive charges. According to every historical precedent, according to the tested logic of modern war, these railways should have remained impassable for months, forcing the Americans into the same grinding supply crisis that had halted every other army in history. Instead, American engineering battalions rebuilt an average of 3 to 7 kilometers of railway per day. Not hasty field repairs, fully functional, standardized track laid with assembly line precision. They brought their own rails, their own ties, their own diesel locomotives when European rolling stock proved insufficient. Behind the front lines, in zones that had been apocalyptic battlefields mere weeks prior, American trains ran on published schedules. Published schedules. As if Normandy were Indiana. As if total war were simply another infrastructure project. German intelligence officers compiled reports with shaking hands, numbers that seemed like typographical errors. By December 1944, the American military was operating over 2,300 locomotives in the European theater, more than the entire remaining functional railway stock of the Third Reich. Supply dumps near the front received 600 tons of material per division per day. German units, by contrast, rationed ammunition, rationed fuel, rationed hope itself. Panzer commanders watched their most sophisticated machines, Tigers and Panthers, that outgunned anything in the American arsenal, sit immobile for lack of gasoline, while American truck columns rolled past in endless, maddening abundance. The Americans didn't just resupply their troops, they oversupplied them, creating surplus at the front that would have represented strategic reserves for any other army in human history. The object that haunts German field reports from this period isn't a weapon, but a symbol of something more destabilizing. the American K-ration. German soldiers who captured American supply dumps found themselves facing not just military equipment, but an almost obscene abundance of food. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, coffee, real coffee, not acorn substitute, tinned meat that was actually meat. One German lieutenant, captured near Bastogne, told his interrogators about finding a warehouse full of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, shipped across an ocean, transported through a war zone, bottled sweetness allocated with the same logistical precision as artillery shells. He had laughed, a raw, broken sound, because what else could such absurdity provoke? This was the revelation that fractured certainty more effectively than any tactical defeat. America was not sacrificing to wage this war. It was not scraping the bottom of reserves, not mobilizing its last desperate resources. It was conducting industrial warfare with what appeared to be a casual fraction of its capacity, as if the European theater were merely one item on a vast production schedule. Germany had transformed itself into a total war machine, consuming its future and its children to feed the Wehrmacht. Its cities burned under Allied bombing. Its people survived on ration cards that grew more austere each month. Every bullet, every liter of fuel, every scrap of leather for boots represented some sacrifice extracted from an increasingly hollow society. And America? America shipped ice cream to its troops in the Pacific, operated mobile laundries behind the lines in France, built entire airfields in weeks, complete with paved runways and control towers, then abandoned them to build better ones closer to the collapsing German frontier. The disparity wasn't merely material, it was philosophical. It revealed that the fascist understanding of total war, the very concept of national mobilization through sacrifice and unified will, was simply obsolete when confronted with democratic industrial capitalism functioning at scale. Von Mellenthin had served under Guderian, had studied Clausewitz, had internalized the Prussian military tradition that warfare was the supreme test of national character. Everything in his education taught that democracies were weak, fractured by competing interests, softened by comfort, unable to sustain the collective discipline that modern war demanded. The Soviet Union, at least, could be understood within this framework, a totalitarian state capable of absorbing apocalyptic casualties through sheer tyrannical will. But America defied the categories. It was producing the material output of a mobilized dictatorship while maintaining butter alongside its guns, maintaining civilian prosperity, maintaining, somehow, the appearance of normalcy. The trains kept rolling past his observation post. American soldiers rode in heated freight cars, smoking cigarettes and eating rations that exceeded in quality what German officers received. They complained about boredom, about wanting to go home, about missing girlfriends and baseball games, complaints intercepted and translated by German intelligence, who read them with the incomprehension of men watching physics violate its own laws. These were not warriors forged in existential struggle. They were citizens in uniform, counting days until demobilization, sustained by a system so abundant it could afford their reluctance. By January 1945, when von Mellenthin was pulled back to help plan the defense of the Rhine, the strategic conversations among senior German commanders had acquired a surreal quality. They still spoke of tactical opportunities, of defensive advantages, of potential political settlements. But beneath the professional language ran a current of fatalism that had nothing to do with battlefield defeats. The Americans were building infrastructure faster than it could be destroyed. They were replacing casualties faster than they could be inflicted. Most devastatingly, they were doing it without the apocalyptic national commitment that was supposed to be the price of such warfare. The ideological foundation upon which fascism had built its theory of conflict, that democracies were too soft, too divided, too comfortable to match the warrior spirit of total mobilization, had been revealed as catastrophically wrong. The trains became more than logistics. They became epistemology. Every locomotive that rolled through rebuilt France carried not just supplies, but proof that the fascist understanding of history was fiction. Germany had bet everything on the belief that industrial modernity required authoritarian control, that mass production necessitated mass coercion, that comfort and strength were opposing principles. The American rail system mocked that bet with every mile of track laid, every ton of supplies delivered, every absurd luxury item, that somehow made it to the front lines. And perhaps this was the deepest wound. Germany could have destroyed those tracks again, could have sent sabotage teams, could have allocated bombers to strike the rail yards, could have expended its dwindling resources to disrupt the supply lines. But to what end? The Americans would simply rebuild them again, faster, more efficiently, with a casualness that suggested infinite capacity. You cannot attrite an opponent who treats reconstruction as routine maintenance. You cannot outlast an enemy for whom abundance is default condition rather than emergency mobilization. The war's outcome had been determined not at Stalingrad or Normandy, but in Detroit and Pittsburgh and Chicago, in factories where workers earned wages and went home to families, where production increased without requiring the totalitarian mechanisms that Hitler had insisted were necessary for modern warfare. The trains rolling through France were not merely transporting supplies. They were transporting the verdict of history itself. Von Mellenthin survived the war, surrendered to American forces in May 1945, and later wrote extensively about the Eastern Front, about tactics and strategy, and the individual brilliance of German military operations. But in private letters, in conversations with fellow officers in POW camps, he returned again and again to those trains, to the impossibility of them, to the moment when ideology collapsed into arithmetic, and arithmetic revealed the abyss. Because in the end, it wasn't American soldiers who defeated the Wehrmacht, not individually, not tactically. It was American capacity, American abundance, the ability to wage industrial war while maintaining the appearance of industrial peace. The trains crossed ruined France carrying a message more devastating than any weapon. That fascism's core premise, its founding wager on the superiority of total mobilization, had been weighed against democratic capitalism and found catastrophically wanting. The rails they ran on were more than transportation infrastructure. They were epitaphs, written in steel and diesel fuel, marking the grave of an ideology that never understood what it was fighting. And they ran on time, always on time, with the terrible reliability of mathematics replacing mythology.